Hello, welcome to this brand new podcast, Enough About Me, with me, Lewis Brown. The chances are you have no idea who I am, but maybe you'll get to know me. I'm really excited to bring this first episode to you. So, Shon Faye. Hey, Shon.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Aren't you gagged by the studio?
Yeah, it is. It's very lovely.
Okay, so when I first asked you, I told you, I'm starting a podcast, I want you to be a guest. Did you ever think that this is going to happen?
Well, what's amazing is that the library happens to be like full of stuff that I would like, which like, what a weird coincidence.
I know, oh my God. Don't you mention these people in your book, Love In Exile?
Yeah, I do mention them all. No, I think like just quickly back on the studio point, like I am impressed. I did think we were going to be recording like at your kitchen table because I've done
that was on the table.
I've done podcasts like that before, like, and I recorded a podcast over Zoom in the pandemic where I was the host, and I was told to like go under my duvet and record from there because of the acoustic.
Was that Call Me Mother?
Yeah.
Oh really? You recorded that like in your room under?
Yeah. The first series, I was like, I had to basically build a den in my childhood bedroom and record it from in there.
Wait, so how did you go about that? Did you interview them? Because
yes, I interviewed them. They had a pre-interview with the producer where we would find out basically what was interesting about their lives. Yeah. And then I would do like a contracted form where we'd revisit that basically. Because sometimes you'll find this as you progress with this project, like sometimes what you think is going to be the interesting thing to talk about, someone will throw a curveball out and you'll be like, wait, I want to talk about that more.
Yeah. I was warned about that when I got my notes and I prepared, and they were like, I've got like 5 minutes this topic, and they're like, that's not going to take 5 minutes to talk about, but we'll see how it goes, you know.
Well, I'm excited. Let's go.
It's an experiment. So you got Love In Exile. I see you got Love In Exile merchandise.
I know.
Where can people get hold of this Love In Exile cap?
The cap is a part of a competition giveaway. I'm trying to support, with both my book releases, I've tried to support indie bookshops, especially queer indies. And yeah, in London, there are 3 bookshops that we're doing this like cap giveaway. If someone pre-orders the book before it comes out on the 6th of February, they are entered into like a ballot and they have a chance of winning this cap. I believe the 3 are, well, they are the Common Press, Gaze the Word, 2 queer bookshops in London, and then Pages of Hackney, which is an East London bookshop that has always been very supportive of me and my work.
Pre-order Love In Exile and get yourself a gorgeous Love In Exile hat. I really like the cover, and I'm actually interested about like how you go about deciding. Do people come to you with like 10 different covers and are like, which one do you like?
I think it varies from publisher to publisher. My experience both times, which I don't think is usual, is Penguin Press, my publisher, have an internal art department with illustrators and designers, and both covers, so you've got the Transgender Issue and Love In Exile, they're both the same woman, one person, Olga, who works in the Penguin art department, and she designed both covers. And I've had the experience both times of just being shown the cover and being like, I love that, yes. Both times I didn't even suggest any changes either time. Really? Yeah, which I know is quite a boring story, but like, because I have obviously lots of friends who are authors, and I think some like have full on rows with the vision. I guess with the Transgender Issue, my key thing was sorry to say this, don't cancel me, but I don't really love the aesthetics of the trans pride flag. And I was like, can we direct it away from blue and pink? So they went for this kind of red socialist agitprop, which emphasized the kind of socialism of the arguments, which I'm quite pleased about. And with this one, I really love it. I think I really love the use of fonts. Like, again, my publisher tends to use fonts rather than like illustrations or photos, and I quite like that because I think it gives it more of a timeless feel. Because
this is your second book.
Yes.
The Transgender Issue I did a little bit of. It was a bestseller.
Take my cap off.
Take your cap off. Your thinking cap off. So the Transgender Issue was Sunday Times bestseller. It also knocked Jordan Peterson's Beyond Reason off of the #1 spot of the Penguin bestseller list. I love it. And it was translated into like 4 languages, I think. Was it Japanese, German, Spanish, and English?
Yes, and Korean.
Oh, and Korean.
It's been acquired in other languages, but it hasn't yet been published in them. So, like, hopefully more are coming, because sometimes they acquire the rights, but they sit on it for a little while.
You're second-time author now, but what's funny is that you've had a couple of other careers before becoming a writer.
I did.
You went a little bit around the houses and that. What did you want to be when you were a child?
Well, whether I actually wanted it to be, what I was thinking when you asked that, what instantly comes to mind is that, like, probably between the ages of 7 and like 11, I heard a teacher talking about barristers and praising barristers and how smart they were. So I basically went around telling everyone I wanted adults, I wanted to be a barrister. And, like, both the fact that I knew what a barrister was and the fact that I was being, like, precocious enough to say I wanted to be that, and adults were like, "Ooh." I don't think that's truly what I wanted, but I think it indicates my psychology as a child, which is that I was very good at, like, learning what would win me praise and I don't know, like, like praise and astonishment from adults.
Okay, so were you kind of like a little teacher's pet, a little
Yes.
precocious
Yeah.
little... I'm going to be a barrister.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, I was a bit of a teacher's pet. I was taught by nuns until the age of 11. An Irish order of nuns in a village in Somerset was where I went to primary school, and they all loved me. Yeah,
I mean, it's giving Sound of Music.
yeah.
tease.
Well, old Irish women still to this day love me. I think, like, yeah, I was a child that, like, preferred talking to adults than talking to my peers, to other children, and yeah, so actually I always got on quite well with adults, and I was of a disposition where certain, especially older women, because I was chatty for I guess a child that was assigned male, and yeah, so I wasn't a very, like, rambunctious kind of hyperactive climbing trees kid. I was like, I'll sit and talk to you like a 6-year-old lady for 3 hours at, like, 7. So it was a certain kind of older woman that liked me.
So were you the kind of child that, like, just wanted to grow up, just wanted to be an adult?
I think I did until I hit puberty, and that's obviously to do with gender dysphoria, but, like, I realized I was maybe physically becoming an adult, but being socialized into being an adult in this specific way, this, like, male socialized way. And so then that caused a little bit of, like, an anxiety about getting older, because I later worked out retrospectively that I didn't want to grow older as a male. And so yeah, so I had this, like, dissonance where in some ways I wanted to be very grown up, but I also didn't want to, like,
You just wanted
actually
to stop.
Yeah, I didn't want to go through the developmental stages of adolescence and, like, all the insecurities and vulnerabilities of that. I wanted to just, like, pop out the other side fully formed, and preferably as a woman.
I mean, wait, so you talk about, like, your adolescence, and you mentioned, I think you mentioned it in the Transgender Issue as well, that you went to an all-boys school.
Yeah.
From when did you go to an all-boys school? High school?
11, yeah.
Okay. How was that?
Me, it was fucking terrible, obviously. Well, look, yeah, I mean, so I went to, the point being, right, is forever, I came from, like, a lower middle class family. So we'll probably get into, my dad wasn't really around when I was growing up, and so we were a single parent, one income family, but I got this scholarship to this all boys minor public school, very traditional English public school. A lot of my teachers, male teachers at that school, were ex-army. It was quite Christian, and all boys schools, for people that aren't familiar with the kind of English single-sex private system, is like, I don't know, that obviously it's like a group of teenage boys without the dilution of girls. Like, it's sort of like incubating this sense of, like, masculinity, this, like, that often is quite sexist, quite homophobic. It was the early 2000s, so, like, a lot of homophobia in society. And I'd gone from this, like, little nun school in a small village, and then I arrived at this school, and it was considered a big opportunity, right? Because I wasn't from this sort of background. Like, I got a fee reduction. I was, like, you know, I wasn't economically equal to a lot of my peers as well, which also had an effect. And I arrived on, like, day 1, and I'm pretty much, like, identified as, like, a very feminine, gay child. I mean, like, I'm not using the obvious slurs that were, like, hurled at me on day 1 of school. and I suddenly had this, like, consciousness, oh, right, so I'm being marked out for this. Obviously, I started to become aware I was queer as well, but you feel deep shame around that. And then I guess, like, what I always talk about with school, like I talk about it in the Transgender Issue, is actually what's weird when there aren't girls around is the sexual element of, like, I think people know this about like all boys public school, the idea that everyone's like, I don't know, jerking each other off or whatever. Like, and to a certain extent, there's like an element of truth that like straight boys bond in this quite homosocial way that's like testing the boundaries. But then when you are identified as like gay or queer or whatever, or failed man in some way, like a lot of the bullying and harassment takes on this like quite sexual tone.
Yeah.
Like you're sexualized quite young. I was quite like, it was a joke, but I'm being sexually harassed. It's a joke, but I'm being groped. It's a joke, you know, so there is this like odd, like relationship to boys and men that has continued well into my adulthood.
Well, and we hear a little bit about that in Love in Exile. I do think like from my friends and like our mutual friends who are kind of feminine, who grew up in either all boys environment or masculine environment, it sort of creates this like toughness about you because you've literally just been a target from day one, and that's how you know life comes at you. And do you think that happened to you? Do you think you developed a kind of like shield?
Yes, I did. I mean, like humor was a big tool for me, right? Like I feel like I'm a quick-witted person, whatever. And that actually also earned me a little bit of favor because especially as we got older, I was at an academically selective school. So I was respected eventually for my academic intelligence, but also like what now is kind of a campy, playful sense of humor in adulthood, I sort of like filtered through this like sardonic, sarcastic sense of humor, which actually like boys at my school quite liked as I got older. So I learned to use humor as like a defense mechanism. And like, I think like a lot of the people that you're describing, whether it's trans women or really feminine gay guys who grew up in all male environments, you kind of like, you know that you can't, it's a difficult balance as well, because if you like give people too much lip, you probably have the sense that physically you're like weaker, or you're made to feel that way anyway. But like I definitely used my kind of wit as a weapon, and sometimes that went badly wrong for me as well. But also you do develop like a hardened exterior, and you learn to switch off as well. But the problem as well, I think for those types, like I always say with trans women, I know a few that went to all boys school, and I'm like, we need a support group that's like even more so than other trans women, because it's a specific kind of trauma is. I think like quite in mixed coeducational environments, like say a gay male child or a trans girl that hasn't transitioned yet, you can like hide in a group of girls. You like find your like straight group of girl friends, and they kind of take you in and look after. I mean, that's the fantasy I had. I mean, like, but that didn't happen. Like you're just there with like straight boys. I mean, like my school was like compulsory rugby for 3 years, like games all the time, like. Yeah, I had to play rugby for 3 years with like homophobic, like posh, you know. So there is that is a fortifying experience, and like it does come out sometimes. Like when I have to deal with a certain kind of macho man, like I can sort of slip back into remembering that, but I don't like it. It definitely has left me with a desire to not necessarily be around certain forms of masculinity ever again.
Yeah. Wait, so was this a boarding school?
It was, but I didn't board.
You didn't?
So it was before social media. When I was home. Like that was obviously a huge difference. The other difference was that, like I said, I was from a single parent family, and in a private school, that's like it is uncommon. There was only one boy in my year that had a single mum, and he was mercilessly bullied for that. Because for being poor, basically. For me, my queerness overtook that in people's perception. But it does also... That definitely had an effect too, because it's like your house isn't as big as the classmates' houses. You're aware your family dynamics are different. So it really did make me struggle to connect. I did have some friends at school; they all turned out to be gay, but like, so I did. I very much had that sense of finding, in that environment, other kind of queer people that went on to obviously identify as gay men. But you don't talk about that because everyone's sort of dealing with their own private shame. So it is just the fact that you recognize each other through the fact that you like the same films and same music. Like we're all listening to Britney in the common room.
Oh, well, you mentioned coming from a single parent house, and you have a whole chapter on your mother or motherhood, your relationship, because you talk about your grandmother in that as well. And like, I know for me, because I also single parent, you know, we've kind of bonded over that like lack of a father figure. And for me, it was really defining, even to the point where I think at one point when I was about 18, I was like, did not having a dad make me gay? That's like, I was like, what is this what happened? But like, you're the eldest as well, right?
Yeah.
And I just know from my experience, I used to have like my mum's friends being like, you've got to look after your mum. And it was like this pressure. I felt I lived under this pressure to like be something that I had no idea how to be. Like, what kind of impact do you think that had on you?
So funny. Male teachers at school who liked me at my secondary school would say things like, "You have to be the man of the house."
Oh God, yeah, I got that.
Which is on many fronts was very funny and jarring.
Like, oh, if you only knew.
Yeah, and my mum wasn't really. My mum was someone that would have been very like scathing of that idea anyway, because she wasn't someone that like. Which is something that I've inherited, which I talk about in the book, is like she isn't deferential to men. I wasn't raised in that way, and my sister isn't either. But yeah, it did affect me. I think because being the eldest child, and my mum was like 35 when my dad completely disappeared from the picture, and she had 3 children. My brother and my sister were younger. My sister was a baby when my mum was 35. And I think about that a lot because I'm 36 now, like how much stress she must have been under. And you do get like, with the best will in the world, you do get somewhat raised to the level of like a little adult because your mum sort of talk, you know, and how can she not? Because it's like so difficult to be making all these decisions for like this group of kids with no other adult to bounce off ideas. So you do, and because I was like I already described, like I was already a child that liked talking to adults and like was very articulate for my age and seemed very mature. I kept playing up to that role, and then naturally that was that like loop where the more I played up to that role, the more it seemed like I was capable to be my mum's confidant, and actually. When I look back now, I'm like, well, developmentally, I just wouldn't have been.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that my mum like shared with me and talked to me about that when I look back, I'm kind of like, I must have been too young to know, because I don't know a time when I didn't have this information about like what my mum was going through. And obviously I have sympathy now because, like you said, she was just this woman who had no other adults to bounce off these things with, and she was just working with the cards she was dealt. You even mention in the book like going on holiday to Rome with your mum, and how crazy the idea of going away with three kids on your own is now. And you also mention actually your brother, who is autistic with learning difficulties. But you don't go too into like that relationship. But what is it like growing up with a sibling who required quite a lot of just attention and support?
Yeah, there's layers to this, right? Because obviously, like the reason that my mum was a single parent, the reason my dad left essentially is that he struggled with addiction and it wasn't something he could ever get well from. So that's a stressor. Then my mum is a single parent and that's a stressor for her. And yeah, another factor was that my brother's disability, like he was diagnosed with autism. He's 18 months younger than me and he was diagnosed in the early 90s. And it's obviously like the way we speak about autism has very much changed, and the understanding of it and the idea that it's a spectrum. But in the early 90s, to have had it identified under the age of 5 years old, basically when it was apparent that he was different in some way, and he was diagnosed, my parents essentially were by the pediatrician would have been given like a list of things he would never do. It was just this like very cold, like and some of them weren't true, because my brother does have speech now, although it's limited. He can read and write, though it's limited. He can't ever live independently. He is a vulnerable adult to this day in many ways. His life needs to be kept quite structured and safe by people around him. But they were essentially given a list of things like he'll never talk, he'll never do this, and I think that must have been a lot to receive. And I think essentially, I mean, my mum and I have talked about it. I think she probably went into quite a lot of grief for like a year after that. And I guess, like, I remember I was I had some counselling in my 20s, and the counsellor was like, well, that will have had an effect on you, which it probably did, right? Because I think I don't believe I'm above this, that, like, there are quite a lot of studies on siblings of children with learning disabilities or just disabilities full stop, which is, and I do remember it's like you have to make allowances. The dynamic is that you are sort of coached from a really young age to get that your sibling might, like, even this idea of fairness or whatever, it's like you have to be thinking about their needs because life is more challenging for them, which is true. But of course that, like, yeah, it like probably shaped my personality, and I don't think entirely badly. I think it's quite, I think it can be quite good to have empathy cultivated that way and to understand, like, the diversity of, like, human existence from quite a young age, which is like your brother's not necessarily like you or doesn't react like you to certain things in quite a drastic way. But, like, yeah, I mean, it definitely shaped the way that I understood myself and understood my family.
How is he supported in living now? Like, how does your mum look after him?
He lives with her. Like, I'm the only one of the four of us that doesn't live in Bristol where I grew up, so I've moved away. But my sister lives very nearby, and my brother and mum still live in the house I grew up in. And, like, that is the plan for the foreseeable. But, like, that's the other thing is that my sister and I have been raised with this specific understanding that, like, eventually, realistically we'll be responsible for supporting my brother or his care. And that's something that we have always been raised with, that knowledge and that sense of, I mean, I'm not going to call it an obligation because for me it's like something I'm happy to do, but obviously it's again, it's not necessarily people who don't have adults, and I think it's very different talking about disabled children to talking about disabled adults. Like, disabled adults in their family, it is a different consideration because you're like, at some point, and I can't, and it is like, it's one of those things you have to do it just for today because, like, we don't know the future point where that's going to happen. We don't know where we're going to be in life. But it is, like, at the back of, I think, both of our minds, and what that will look like eventually, who knows? But yeah, it's certainly there, and I'm happy to have that sense of obligation. I mean, I've kind of realized that as I've gotten older is, once you get, like, past 30, whatever, like, all of us have, like, obligations to someone or to one another. And, like, there's always the idea that you can just, like, cut free and not be responsible to anyone, like, probably turns you into quite, like, a selfish adult. So in some ways it's easier to comprehend and be okay with that now than perhaps it was when I was, like, 18.
Yeah. Like, part of being an adult is having responsibilities to each other, and also the idea that, like, our common good is good for all of us. And I just, like, I liked that you highlighted the difference between, like, having a child with learning difficulties and an adult, because I think when you look at, like, homelessness communities, for example, they're full of basically vulnerable adults who have learning difficulties, and the situation is not always where there is a family network that can look after that adult. And really the state, especially in the last 15 years, has just degraded that ability to look after these vulnerable adults.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in the case of Kieran, my brother, I suppose, I remember because he was like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child, actually much cuter child than me. Like, when there is a child who has a learning disability, there is this kind of almost like endearing, oh, that's lovely, and it's kind of like, well, they're permanently in a kind of younger child state, and people adults and family friends find it quite sweet. But it is different when someone is like a man in his like mid-30s who, if his environment were to change very suddenly, or he became overstimulated, could become quite agitated in public, everything about that presents, like, new risks about, like, the fact that we live in quite a society where people look at an adult and don't expect adults with learning disabilities to be part of society, and often want to disappear that problem. And I think it's a whole different ballgame. It's tough in both ways for children and people who are raising children and a lot of parents who don't know what to do when they first realize that their child might have a learning disability. But it's also like very tough, I think, with adults, for the adult themselves and also for those around them.
You spoke about responsibility and community, essentially. And in the book, you talk about all different kinds of love. And like, we could talk all day about the different subjects that you land on. But like, essentially, it's love manifested in kind of like physical, sexual relationships, friendships, family, all of that. And but what I want to know is, when did you realize, right, I need to write about love?
It's a good question. When did I realize I had to write about it? I decided to write about it like in 2021. Honestly, the reasons for writing about it have changed in the time that I wrote the book. I guess like the catalyst for writing about love is in the book itself. So there's a beginning chapter. The book begins with a romantic breakup, a heartbreak that for me, it happened around the time I turned 30, so like many years ago now, where I had met this person. He had a lot that was right with him on paper. He wasn't a perfect person, like a bit of a flawed person, certainly did not necessarily have the tools to date a trans woman, even though he tried his best. And it was quite a chaotic relationship. But at the time, I was so in love with him, and I was like, this is going to save me. I've like arrived at this point, and I'm just going to be this person's girlfriend, and I can escape all of the like mess and trauma of my like earlier life and my 20s in particular. And obviously that didn't happen. So it meant that when we broke up, I was devastated, obviously, about the relationship ending. But I was like devastated on another level. Like the way I always talk about this, right, is I've always said I don't take heartbreak well. And like everyone's like, no one takes heartbreak well, right? No one does. But what I have realized, I would say, is a bit of a crude binary. But when some people say they don't take heartbreak well, they mean I'm heartbroken because this isn't worked out. And I'm sad that this has not worked out. And then there's the other kind of heartbroken, which is like, I'm sad this hasn't worked out. And because this hasn't worked out, it's reaffirmed that I'm worth nothing. Life is meaningless. And this whole point of my existence is like nothing. Like, fuck, like, why am I even here? And I was in that camp until probably quite recently. And I had that reaction then. And it really like took me quite a long time to get over it. And then I had some other relationships, and they just kept ending up as a car crash. And I guess I became interested in the topic of love then. And I guess with both my books, I sort of have written them on a slightly it's not naive, because I know it's not going to work when I do it, but I over-intellectualize everything. And I think that's often where the idea for both my books have come from, is like, why don't I intellectually wrestle with this, and it might help me to solve it. Like if I intellectually wrestle with transphobia, maybe it's going to make me feel better about transphobia, or make transphobia go away. No, turns out it doesn't. And the same with love, which is like at the end of the book, I put like a postscript at the very end being like, by the way, I'm still crazy. Yeah, so I guess like that experience of like the other thing that I wanted to write about it for was because there aren't any books about love written by trans women. Like trans women are not considered like the subject matter of like who, like when you think about who writes a book about love, you think about like Dolly Alderton, and I love Dolly, but like you think of like woman neutral. Like a trans woman does not get to write about love or sex or any of the things that I try and write about, like from her own perspective. We're not considered lovable in the wider culture. Like I saw Hunter Schafer talking on a podcast about a previous relationship, and just like when trans women talk in public about like their very ordinary like relationships with ex-boyfriends or whatever, just the response is so hateful that like I wanted to like contradict that and say like, actually my love life is like everyone's. It's like my universe is as relevant to me as yours is to you.
But I think that's like the response from the people who've read the book as well, and it is a universal experience about love, but it's from your perspective, right? Yeah. And I think I remember at the time of the transgender issue, you were quite strict about it not being a trans memoir, a kind of like trauma dump, here's my pain kind of thing. And it was like an academic argument for the liberation of trans people. But this book, you are sharing with us like some like really personal, exposing things. You're being really vulnerable with us, right? So what was the journey there? When did you feel, okay, this needs to be told, I need to share this part of me? Because like some of it is like, is really, really, really honest.
Yeah, it is. I guess there was a shift. The Transgender Issue was my first book, and like historically, trans women have only ever been able to bring out trans memoir, which is like the Jan Morris conundrum thing of like, I'm going to tell you the story of my medical transition, and it's quite exploitative. And there's a long canon of like trans women being really having to bear all in order to be like heard or get published, and I didn't want to participate in that. And I also wanted to like present this like very calm, rational, detached art political argument. But I guess once I'd done that and it had been successful, I was like, well, what next? And actually, there were writers, so Tori Peters' Detransition Baby, which is a novel, but the way that she wrote inside the trans women's characters' heads and said things that like I have felt and thought, but like are not necessarily the squeaky clean image you as a minority group feel like you have to portray. That inspired me. And also like my friend Annie Lord, who is a dating columnist for Vogue and had written this like, sometimes she was writing about her love life and she didn't come out of it looking great. Like it was like, and she came out of it sometimes looking like a bit selfish or like a little bit superficial or whatever, like we all are. And I think that both of those, they jumped to mind as like, they kind of inspired me to think like, well, why can't I write something about this aspect of my life and be like as honest as I can, and try. And also I had been put on a pedestal with my first book a little bit, and I don't like that dynamic at all. Like I don't want to be like a saintly trans person, and I got to a point where I was less unwell, let's say that, than I had been in my like I'd struggled with addiction and various other issues in my 20s, and I was in recovery for those, and I was like, I could now write about this like very honestly, and I also think you have to write really honestly if you're going to write about something about love, because there's so much stuff that's quite trite and sentimental written about love that like just switches people off. And I think like people need to be able to see a bit of mess so that when I'm talking in a slightly more like evangelical way about spirituality or self-love or recovery or whatever, like that there's actually people have bought into that because they see that I'm speaking from like very raw experience.
I mean, it's something from the personal actually gets people on side. Not to be all RuPaul about it, but we need to see the vulnerability, darling. That first chapter, obviously, I related to it, and I remember when I went through a breakup like around 3 years ago. You were very...
I remember.
Yeah, you were very kind, and you looked after me, and yeah, I really related with that thing because I thought that relationship fixed me, and my failure to make that relationship work was like it was like an existential crisis. I felt like that relationship ending was like people were trying to kill me. It was over, and it kind of like broke me psychologically, and like literally felt like, I think I remember saying to you at the time, being like, it's like my dad's left all over again. I will forever be abandoned.
In a way, it is, you are sort of replaying that trauma. I mean, it felt like that because that's essentially what you have recreated that.
The nervous system is happening again.
Yeah, you're, like the body's keeping the score, babes.
Oh, what was that meme you posted the other day that was like, can we get bodies that don't keep the score? It's funny you said that about like, you're feeling that same thing, because there was something that I didn't have in my notes, but I picked it up when I was reading it about the processing kind of online feminism, right? I really related to it in the sense of like how I consumed kind of online anti-racism in like a 2015, 16, 17 era time where I didn't go to university, right? I was getting all of this kind of like very online anti-racism that just made me angry.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm mixed race, right? So it's kind of like I was angry at essentially people I loved who were like my family. And it was counterproductive to my life. And I would find when little things happened that might have been like racist or whatever, I was not just experiencing that, I was experiencing like everything that I hadn't processed, and I was getting all this information from online. But could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I get what you mean, which is like, it's a really difficult thing with feminism, right? Which is at what point where is the balance? And it's an open question. It's like, where is the balance with like men and men as a category and like women, if you're a woman, cis or trans, like that you've probably you either have been victimized by men or you have the fear of it. And that's a rational fear given like looking around the world. And it's like, how do you tolerate that, particularly when you happen to be heterosexual, as in you love and want to share your life with and have sex with and share like intimate things with the category of people who you're afraid of. And when you like you have daddy issues or whatever, and like I've just described here some of the stuff with my dad, the stuff with being in an all boys environment, it's like I could definitely use very simplistic feminist discourses to keep pushing this and reaffirming to myself this belief that no man can be trusted. And it became counterproductive because I still fancy them, frankly. Like maybe if I was a lesbian, it would be like separatist.
Don't we all?
But like then if you go into sexual and romantic dynamics with this belief that like you are not to be trusted, it's almost worse. It's better to be a bit deluded, but that had been shattered for me. So yeah, I was using sometimes that to bolster my own feelings of resentment and anger, but not realizing that resentment and anger was also making me choose, frankly, some of the worst men I could have. Like there has to be yeah. And it's difficult because I talk in the book a lot about like women do have to contend with this idea. You know, the Giselle Pellico case has reaffirmed this. Is like the industrial scale of like misogynist and, you know, domestic sexual violence, etc. Like women have to like contend with that. And like I think there's a lot of the reasons why I think a lot of the like anger at trans women that's going on in feminism in the UK is a displacement. It's too hard to confront the fact that like the men that you know most intimately might be the people that you're most afraid of. So you displace it onto like a minority group, and it happens to be trans people at this point in history. But like for me personally, like I that's why I can see that in like anti-trans feminism, is because actually, funnily enough, I have like a version of it myself, which is like it's categorically easier to just write men off. But that's also not feminist, because you have to believe that like even like negative male behaviors are socialized. They're not born bad. And also that like that there are obviously exceptions, because there's this sort of strange effect where I was sort of and again, I talk about this in the book, particularly with sex, right? Is that there were times where I was so pessimistic about my ability to have a loving relationship with a man. I sort of swapped out sexual validation for that because I'd written that off. And then as that went on, I was starting to pick more and more like unsuitable and often quite hyper-masculine men, the exact sort of men that I wouldn't want to spend, like I wouldn't want to have dinner with them. And I would feel a mixture of fear and anxiety around them, but then I would be doing like the most intimate things ever with them. And I had to like...
I was scared. I was scared.
I mean... Yeah, they were. Well, I mean, a lot of gay men thought it was great what I was doing. but I do always say to straight women, if gay men are like really praising your sex life, like, are you okay?
Well, I remember when you said, if Lewis is worried, it must be bad.
yeah, literally. So I guess in some ways I recognized, and also I don't want to be... it's hard because sometimes anger is the normal response, and we can't be delusional about the scale of like patriarchy and patriarchal violence. But I also like a deep-seated, like harbored, ongoing resentment towards men isn't going to help me, and it is counterproductive.
Well, I mean, so you are dating again after a period of not,
yes,
after having a break. So given all that, how are you approaching dating now, given that like you're not in this kind of like femcel, like dump him feminism? You're kind of like, you're giving it a chance, you're being optimistic, right? So how are you approaching it that's different than how you were before?
Well, for me, optimism in this area is always going to be a renewed practice, because I can't just achieve a state of optimism, because also like every time that there are setbacks with that, right? Like you try and be optimistic, and then an individual person disappoints you in some way, and it's easy then to revert back to this like very easy core belief like, oh, men are always going to let me down. I guess like the point about dating now is, I did a lot of work in that area, and that included like not dating for quite a long time. And I guess what I would say on that is I for the first time in my life, I have a sense of certainty and comfort that I have the tools to be able to recognize a healthy person, a healthy man, to be able to recognize things like, am I being respected and considered and seen, and do I feel safe with this person, and to value that more than like looks or status or whatever. And I also have enough regard for myself and my own life and my own inner peace that I don't want to hand over my serenity and peace of mind to something like which I have done many times before, a relationship that is like constantly giving like up till 5 a.m, stressing, worrying, like frazzled, like do I need to be like reading their phone, etc. Like not in that like insane space. Which comes from building a life that you don't want to run away from to begin with. So I have more understanding about what something healthy could look like, and a sort of person that could offer me that. Knowing to be able to recognize it doesn't mean I've found it, and it doesn't mean I can like will it into my life. It just means, unfortunately, like, at this point, it just means I'm excluding a lot of people. But like the point is that that's all of any of us can do, is like I can't will that into being. I just have to keep having trust in my tools to do that, and then constantly just work on remaining like open enough, and not becoming like fatigued by the process. But that's like really difficult for anyone, and like for women in London on dating apps, etc. The whole discourse, like that's the point, right? Is you can fix yourself enough to pick someone that's not crazy. You can stop being crazy enough so that you won't also pick other crazy people, but then you can't also just like present someone, because it's got to be like, as well as them just being like safe and kind to me, I also have to fancy them, have an intellectual connection. They have to be wanting a relationship at the same time that I do. Like I then have to be willing to sacrifice certain things about my single life and vice versa. And like, I don't know, it does still feel like, it always feels like it's quite a tall order until it happens. And then people, so how am I approaching dating? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to just work on like remaining open-minded and having like trust, because the family narrative, I think all families have stories and ways in which the world are that your family hands down to you. And one of them is, in mine was like, you can't trust love and you can't trust men. And like I'm having to like...
And you're working against that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, so let's have a bit of fun then.
Okay.
If you go on a date, what are like dating icks for the men at home who would want to
no men,
watch
men watching this?
Yeah.
Interesting
One
women.
ick is you're watching this podcast. What's like a dating ick? What is like? I can't deal with
It's
that.
interesting though, because do you know what I've realised? That I think my theory is that a lot of straight women's icks is actually like about masculinity, and it's often when men behave in a childlike way, because men are like, and women reinforce this as much, is like straight men are supposed to act just like completely unenthused by everything. So like loads of them are like men having little failures of masculinity, and often quite like a childlike helpless way. Like I remember one of my like really good friends, she just got the full ick for this guy because they were getting into an Uber, the door was locked on his side, so he just kept pulling at the door.
Oh my God.
And she was just like, that was it. I could never see him.
These poor men.
As sexy again.
These poor men.
Yeah, and I read a friend's manuscript recently, and it was talking about like straight men that are really giddy at a gig and like childlike and excited, because it's like, oh God. So it's like a childlike enthusiasm, or something that's like a surrender of like this like insouciant masculinity. Anyway, what are my icks? So I'm trying not to do that, because I actually think childlike wonder in a man is actually quite endearing. In small, I don't like a manic pixie dream girl. Might be a bit too much, but a little bit of childlike wonder in a man is quite nice. What are my biggest dating icks? I'm trying to think, because an ick is, because now I don't want to be like inconsistency.
Okay, what about red line? What about red lines? What about red lines on the first date? They bring up your books, Do you like that? Do you
No,
like
I
someone
don't.
interested in your work?
No,
Why not? Why
I don't
you like people
don't
interested?
fuck a fan. I've learned that the hard way. No, yeah, I do. I actually find, okay, if you want me to be real, right, is that I have like a semi-public facing career. It is a little bit of an ick for me when men are weird about it. And weird can be both insecure, where they're like, oh, like, and then they start talking about how they've like done a little stalk of me or whatever. The other is when they put me on a pedestal. Like, oh, I've seen, like, I've had men like on dates, like halfway through reveal that they've seen me on Novara Media. And it's like, well, why didn't, you could have either said that right at the beginning, or, to be honest, like a Novara Media fanboy, isn't it? Sorry. But like, so yeah, like a weirdness around my career and my work, and that suggests that there's like a bit of a barrier in terms of not wanting to get to know me is definitely an ick. Red lines, yeah, I have some. So, like any signs of like alcohol or drug addiction or problematic relationship with that, like as someone that has struggled with that, might be a bit of a different conversation if they're in recovery for a long time. But like, yeah, no. And I've experienced that before. Just even British culture, if drinking seems to matter a lot to someone, that's a red line. Obviously, being a trans woman too, is I am looking out for things like fetishization. So what that might look like in my case is, has this guy like had sex with lots of trans women outside of the context of dating? Like, they've basically spent a lot of time on dating apps, and they basically allude to the fact that they've hooked up with a lot of trans women, but they don't have like a trans ex-girlfriend.
Isn't there like a word for that now? Did you mentioned that in the book? There's like it's like a new sexuality that's been
Scoliosexual. Yeah, on field, scoliosexual. Yeah, I mean it's like, I just honestly just say, oh, I like trans girls. I think yeah, like, to be honest, it's a difficult one, that, because a lot of younger trans girls that I speak to like have the fantasy of like, oh, they want like a straight guy that's never dated a trans girl before. And I'm a bit like, I don't know that I want that necessarily either, though, like, because it's, yeah, I don't mind if someone's like dated around a bit and they've maybe dated and whatever, but it's not that I have to have been the only trans woman they were ever attracted to. But obviously there is, I don't know if it's something you can relate to. I mean, we have talked about fetishization in the past and like the chat around that, but I think, yeah, it's just a bit of a red flag to me if someone especially because it's very easy for men to go around and like have slept with a lot of trans girls, knowing that, like, I know because I've written about it, like what I was like when I was younger, which is like, you're taking any crumbs of affection, and if he's like benefited from that and he's like not really cared, this is like a minority group of women that probably like might have self-esteem issues and has no insight into that gives me the ick. The other red flags I guess I have, you always make fun of me for this, but I do think at this stage in my life, men that don't have their like shit together in terms of finances and
oh my god,
work
yeah,
and
not
career.
broke.
Yeah.
She doesn't date broke.
You make it sound like that. I don't. It's not even that they need to be well off or whatever, but like, it's like you have to have like.
She's not splitting the bill. Basically,
you need to have like something that they care about, something they're ambitious about, and something they're working towards. And realistically, like, that does matter too, because I'm doing all right. Like, I have a pretty like strong career now after some pretty hard work, and I don't really want to be resented, which often comes up for like not just me but lots of women. Like, men resent successful women if they don't feel like they've got their own place in the world, or their own ambitions that they're working towards.
What's next for Shon Faye? Have you got an idea for a new book? Is it percolating? I
have, I guess. I actually, as we're friends, I'll share a bit. So I had an idea for a new non-fiction book, but I've somewhat parked that, and I've actually been experimenting with some fiction, which I have an idea around that, and I'm at the very beginning of it, but it's sort of captivating me a lot more than the non-fiction idea. So I didn't necessarily think that I would wind up doing fiction, but I think there is a sort of natural leap with memoir to fiction. The reason being is there are lots of scenes from past relationships of mine in the book, and you set a scene, but you will have to. I had to strip out a lot of dialogue because the privacy of the other people involved, and I realized quite quickly sometimes fiction is better for telling truth, like emotional truth, because you're not having to protect real people, and you're not having like. Also, there are things that I want to say or explore that if I say them as Shon Faye, I'm too afraid of being liked. And when with characters in fiction, you get to explore like the nuances and the grey areas of life a little bit more. And I think I'm interested in the potential for that.
I mean, it's quite a natural progression almost, because you've got like quite straight academic like analysis, a display of mental illness.
Yes.
and then
Very beautiful display of mental illness.
So can we find out like what's going on, or do you want to keep it to yourself for now? Is it not
I think I won't say any more than that, except that I think it will be, if I pull it off, it will be genuinely quite surprising. I think it's interesting. I saw Sally Rooney talk about how she doesn't think novelty is always good in creative and written work, and like this idea that you have to be constantly putting out new stuff. And I sort of agree with her. However, I do quite like the huge shifts. I think I just get bored. Like I could have done 5 different books on like gender theory and gender politics, and I could do like another memoir that takes another topic instead of love and like does a through line of my life through it. But it's just like it's boring to me. I think I like short, intense focus on things, and then move on.
You learnt from Madonna, babe. You got to freshen up. You got to reinvent yourself.
I know this was my Ray of Light era. Now we're on to Confessions.
Confessions on the dance floor. What are you reading right now? Have you got anything on the go? Are you excited for anything to come out?
That's a good question. I was reading a lot over Christmas and New Year, and now I've been reading a lot of books that get sent to me for blurbs, actually. And what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to, in terms of, there's so many books by trans women this year that seem really good. Like my friend Nicola Dinan's novel Disappoint Me is coming out in January, and Tori Peters' book Stag Dance is coming out, and I read both of those and they were great. I'm trying to think of what else I'm reading. Non-fiction wise, I've actually been reading a lot of like Susan Sontag essays. I regarding the pain of others, about war photography, because actually the non-fiction project I have parked, but I think I will return to, is a book of essays about violence.
Yes, okay.
And I am interested in that. It probably now won't be the next project, but I feel like our society is only getting more violent, unfortunately. And part of the reason that I don't want to write it now is actually psychologically, I don't think I can take it. But I'm very interested in what Susan Sontag wrote about imagery of war and the effect that has and what it's used for, given especially everything that we witness through our phones now. I'm reading that alongside a lot of novels, and I've also just read. I'm like now back. I couldn't really bear anything too much about love, but I'm quite enjoying just very like light romantic fiction now. Like I need some optimism. I need some happy endings.
Okay. Well, talking about romance and love, just to finish on this, we'll play a quick game.
Okay.
Because
You're so excited about
I know,
that.
I'm so excited. This is like my first idea when I was going to interview you, because we know that you are a firm believer of the Britney Spears saying that there are 2 types of people in the world.
Yes.
Ones that entertain and ones that observe. So
We're both entertainers, darling.
We're both entertainers. But I've got famous couples throughout history, and you're going to tell me which one is the entertainer and which one is the observer. Okay. Victoria and David Beckham.
I think he's the entertainer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, come on. Yeah, the sarong and the hair and the way that he used to swagger out on the football pitch being like, I've changed my hair, I'm a metrosexual. And she's in the Spice Girls, but I don't think she's an entertainer. As her solo,
she is the observer in the Spice Girls.
Yeah, I think he's the one that entertains.
Okay. Victoria and Albert.
Victoria and Albert.
Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Yeah,
I think
we're intellectual here.
I think she's the one that entertained, because didn't she wear like black for like 20
yeah,
years after he...
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, she wore black for 20 years after he died, which is such a like dramatic, over the top. I mean, it's kind of giving you after your breakup, isn't it? And me, being like, I'm over. I'm not going to wear black for decades. Yeah. So she's an entertainer and he was an observer. She was the queen.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she was the queen. Zendaya and Tom Holland.
She's the one that entertains.
Yeah, he's quite a like, my queen.
Yeah, exactly.
He does dote on her. Kurt and Courtney.
Courtney's the one that entertains.
I agree, yeah. And I think Kurt would agree.
I was obsessed with that clip of Courtney Love talking about Dave Grohl recently that went, well, he knows that I know that he knows that I know that I know. I'm obsessed with Courtney Love, who I had dinner once and talked about the transgender issue with. That's my claim to fame. I gave her a signed copy of the transgender.
That is quite slay, yeah.
And she was very entertaining at dinner, I have to say. She is someone that is, she knows a good story. She knows when to name drop. She knows when to comic. You know, when someone's got their Hollywood anecdotes down and they're prepared to serve them up. There's none of this discretion where they're going to not pretend that they don't have all this tea.
Okay, so quick one before we do the last one. Who is a celebrity that you've met, had dinner with, whatever, that was like quite fun, like quite a gag?
I mean, Jennifer Coolidge.
Jennifer Coolidge.
Jennifer Coolidge and me together is my background picture on my phone, because I had 2 boyfriends in 1 year at the height of my madness, and both of them, because I raced into both relationships, I had, you know, this is my boyfriend, and then both times it fell apart really quickly, and I had to get rid of the boyfriend. So I was like, I'm never having a man. Or a straight man, anyway. I've had gays. I'm never having a boyfriend as my phone background again. So it's currently me and Jennifer Coolidge at dinner. I met her at an event for GQ that I was a chairperson of an event. They hired me, and it was this like big celebrity event. And I met her, and then a few days later, my friend got this call, and she wanted to go out with some people in London, and she picked 5 trans women, and we all went to see Cabaret. On Jennifer Coolidge, and then for dinner. And I had a friend that was in the cast of Cabaret, and I could sort of see there's obviously a lot of queer people in the London production of Cabaret, and I could see them all clocking her. And then as soon as the show was over, we were all like taken backstage because they all wanted to meet Jennifer Coolidge, and she's exactly how you.
These gays, they're trying to kill me.
Yeah, it was after that. And she was very fun. She was very sweet. And very much like pretty much how her public persona is. I think is her voice the voice? Yes. And it's a heightened version of who she fundamentally is. She's clearly very aware of how people are going to react to her in this kind of kooky ditzy thing, but it is her. It's not a complete act. It's not the Paris Hilton where she switches from the baby voice to that me with my taxi voice with when I'm like when I'm trying to give uncockable, my Paris Hilton. Like, I know
I've been in a taxi where you're just like, hi, can we go to?
And I'm like, okay. Yeah, and then Paris Hilton, the minute that she like is doing something serious, like in court or whatever, she like drops an octave. Yeah, so Jennifer Coolidge is very cool and fun.
Okay, great. And the final entertainer and observer. It was supposed to be quickfire round, but it is not very quickfire. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth.
Oh my God. No, Lady. That's a good one. I think in the context of the play, Lady Macbeth is the one that entertains. I'm going to Macbeth to see Lady Macbeth.
I mean, going up on the roof in the rain, being like, can't take my womanhood. That's quite...
I think he doesn't really observe, but she definitely entertains.
Well, after the speech where she's like, what's the speech? Where she's like, when he's like
the Raven himself,
where he's like bottling it, and she's like, man up, you fucking pussy.
Yeah, she is. She's like, she says he's too full of the milk of human kindness.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. She got the ick from Macbeth. He was like the giddy guy jumping up and down at a gig. He's too childlike.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, for God's sake.
And murder someone, grow up and murder someone, commit regicide.
And on that note, thanks, Shon. Thanks for doing this.
No, thank you for having me on.
Hey, if you like that conversation, please like and subscribe. Make a comment. Tell us what you loved about it. Tell us what you hated about it. We don't care. We want to know. And if you really loved us and you want to support our work, go to patreon.com/enough about me.